Kathy, if you'll lead with the roll call.
Sure. Mr. Nader? Here. Mr. Moss? Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Ricucci? Here. Mr. Denayo? Here. Mr. Stevenson? Here. Mr. Gray?
Here. Next, we'll listen and hear from Mr. Johnson, our planning director.
We have a new projector and screen, which should make the presentations a little more visible, both in dark conditions and light conditions. So we will be looking for your comments on how the screen is performing today.
Mr. Johnson, not for Richard and I. We've got an angle here that won't quit.
Or start.
So I just thought I'd make that. You said you wanted comments.
We'll go to a plasma screen so you can see it from any angle.
Oh, I got the screen in front of me. I apologize.
For the Commission's information, an appeal was filed on the North Star Forest Flyer project, which was approved by your Commission back in May, and I will keep you updated as that moves forward through the appeal process up to the Board of Supervisors. We had anticipated that your next meeting, June 27th, would be in Tahoe. There have been some changes, and that meeting has been moved back to July 11th instead. We will have a workshop June 27th here in Auburn. It will be our second workshop on the zoning text amendment for community centers. July 11th, we will have a Tahoe meeting where we will update the Commission and the public on the community center or community plan process that is being reviewed right now. And then on July 25th, we're proposing to have our second workshop on wineries. The first workshop will be at today's meeting. Are there any questions or comments?
What was the basis for the appeal on the North Star project?
The appeal was filed on behalf of the Aspen Grove Condominium Association. They contend that there are some drainage issues associated with the forest flyer that will adversely impact their residential development. They also questioned the Commission's conclusion that the project was consistent and similar to a ski lift and a ski run. And so those are some of the primary issues that will be discussed in the appeal to the board.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Now, for the public, if anyone would like to step up and address the Commission concerning anything not on the agenda today, this would be the time to do it. And seeing no one, we'll move on to a next item. And I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Stevenson.
Well, thank you and good morning. Once upon a time, there was another member of our commission that was with us for quite some time, and he has now moved on to greener pastures. And so we just thought it was time that we might say how much we appreciated him and how much we enjoyed his company through all those many years of hard work and the toil and the sweat that he gave to the Planning Commission. And so we have a resolution that's been prepared, and would hope that you would bear with me for a brief time while I read it. And this is before the Planning Commission of Placer County, State of California. The Planning Commission of the County of Placer, State of California, does hereby commend Gerald Brentenhall as follows. Whereas Gerald Jerry Brentenhall served as a Placer County Planning Commissioner for 16 years, representing District 4 for 4 years, and then as the at-large commissioner west of Sierra Crest for 12 years. And whereas Jerry served as Planning Commission Chairman in 2000, 2006, and 2010, and whereas Jerry attended 236 Planning Commission hearings, whew, what a job, and whereas Jerry always maintained integrity with a commitment to serve the Placer County property owners, and whereas Jerry had impeccable timing and always knew how and when to present a motion to summarize the Commission's decision and subsequently move on to the next agenda item. And whereas because of his knowledge and experience and his dedication to Placer County, Jerry is highly respected by his fellow commissioners, county staff, and the citizens of Placer County. And whereas Jerry often cited the law of unintended consequences in deliberating a questionable project element, and whereas in front of the public and behind the scenes, Jerry participated in some of the most important land development decisions in Placer County, including Placer Vineyards specific plan, the Regional University Project Plan, the Forest Hill Community Plan, and the Granite Bay Community Plan, and countless zoning text amendments. Whereas whether dealing with a larger or more complex development project or the most minor project where Jerry found it necessary to advocate for a trail, it was always apparent that when Jerry spoke, the Planning Commission listened. And whereas Jerry asserted strong community values and provided astute and creative decisions so that all in attendance understood and respected the actions and decisions that were rendered. Now, therefore, be it known that Gerald Brinton Hall is no longer required to travel through sleet, snow, and out of blizzards over Summit to attend other Tahoe Planning Commission hearing, or fret about getting stuck in Tahoe during an I-80 closure. Be it further known that Placer County Planning Commission hereby commends Gerald Brinton Hall on his 16 years of dedicated service to the citizens of Placer County as Planning Commissioner, and sincerely wishes him the best. Mickey Gray and Larry Stevenson. Should that be a motion?
Yes. I'll accept that motion. A second? Can we have a vote? Ayes?
Aye. Do we have a clock?
Right there in front.
Oh. I thought it was happening. I'm sorry. I just took them off. I know you did. I can't see. We're going to miss you, Jerry.
Thank you, Larry. I'll miss you too. Although I'm surprised that didn't say you listened to my advice, but seldom agreed with it.
I couldn't say that. You're going away.
That's true. All sins are forgiven. I sat here and listened to this in 200 and something meetings. Wow, that sounds like a lot of meetings. When you take them one at a time, it's not so bad. I'd like to thank Mr. Johnson, your predecessor, Fred, and all the staff members for the kindness you've shown me. I know it's somewhat frustrating when one of these new planning commissioners come in and you have to educate them all over again. I tried to reciprocate by discussing things with you in advance so that you knew what the questions were before they arrived, so as I used to put it to you, so you could look good in front of the boss, like you were really prepared. Also, thank you for enhancing my vocabulary. I've learned a lot since I've been here, things like vertical curves. And thanks to Stephanie, traffic calming devices, one of my favorites. She said to me one day, we were having an argument about something. She said, well, we'll just install a traffic calming device there. What is that? Oh, you know, stop signs, yield signs, traffic circles.
Choco.
Yeah, they calm the traffic down. And I'll miss the commissioners. We've had some great debates. This commission works as a commission should. There's nothing behind scenes. It's done right here in front of God, the King, the public, and everybody. And afterwards, even though it got a little heated at times, you'd slap me on the back and we'd go to lunch. That's the way it's supposed to work, and I thank you for the courtesy that you've shown me. And Michael, I have a presentation for you. If you could come up for just a second. Perhaps it's my military training, but I remember when I was in the Air Force and they issued you something that, by God, you'd better return it or it became really expensive, like a golden toothpick or something would be $10,000. When I joined this organization in '97, I was issued this briefcase. Now, Larry, you may be one of the few, maybe Ken, that remembers when these came around. And I feel it's my duty to return this to the county in front of witnesses.
Does it,
It's also loaded
with all the,
with codes, community plans, all the things that you've given me over the years that perhaps you can recycle at this point now that it's online.
Thank you so much for the generous gift.
Oh, I appreciate you doing it. My wife appreciates it because she was convinced at one time that because of the weight that this carried, that I was going to walk around with my knuckles dragging on the ground afterwards. We went through some really interesting economic times. There were times we had 2 meetings a week, and the evenings, people hanging off the walls, and the never-ending projects like the Forest Hill Community Plan. And then we went to where we didn't meet, maybe once a month or less, and now we seem to be crawling out. So to some extent, this commission represents a microcosm of the economy of the United States. Once again, thank you all for being so kind to me for those years, and enjoy your briefcase.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Now that we've enjoyed that particular part of the meeting, we'll move on to our first agenda item. And if Lisa would, yes, there she is. Please inform us.
While we're waiting for the mass exodus. Good morning, Lisa Carnahan with Planning. I'm here to present the Crow's Peak new chairlift for Sugar Bowl. And got a couple of slides here for you. So they're requesting, Sugar Bowl is requesting a new chairlift. It's a operation and construction of a new fixed grip triple chairlift and associated ski runs. 63-acre project site. This is the new chairlift right here. These are the existing chairlifts. Here's Highway 80, Soda Springs, Norden, to kind of give you a
Show us Mickey's house.
There.
right here, huh? Right somewhere in here.
Just that.
This site is zoned forestry, combining minimum building area of 160 acres in this area, and down in here it's forestry with a development reserve. Here's a close-up. The upper portion of the chairlift and the top terminal would be on USDA land. This portion of the chairlift is within the Sugar Bowl Corporation's land. Separate approval from the USDA was received May 10th for the upper portion. The new chairlift would accommodate approximately 800 skiers per hour. Here's a little bit different view looking from the other way. The primary trail here would be fully groomed. This is the existing overland trail. So the primary trail would be cleared of trees, and then there would be this gladed ski area where the trees would remain. And there would be connections to the existing overland trail coming down here to the bottom terminal. And as you see, the top terminal is not quite at the peak of Crow's Peak. Mitigated neg deck was prepared for this project, and the comment period closed June 10th. We did receive only one comment letter, and that was given to you this morning. It was from CAL FIRE. They were requiring a timber conversion plan and a timber harvest plan, both of which are being prepared by the applicant. In addition, in your packet, you will have seen an errata to the mitigated neg deck, and the reason for that is there was a condition that was a mitigation measure that was not necessary to convert to a condition because it was not applicable. It was inadvertently added to the mitigated neg deck, but it's for the Lahontan area, and this is in the Central Valley area, so just as a clarification purposes. This is an example of the what the top terminal will look like. We presented this to the Donner Summit MAC back in May, and the issues discussed were the general plan and zoning consistency, aesthetics, parking, and traffic impacts. And the site zoning does allow for ski runs and ski lifts with the implementation of a conditional use permit. And although approximately 396 trees will be removed, let me go back, for the run, because it is in an area, obviously a ski resort with other ski runs, and with the condition and mitigation measure that they paint any of the chairs, towers, terminals, or coat them with a non-reflective material to make them go away visually as much as possible. Impacts to aesthetics were deemed to be less than significant. With regards to the parking, they're not going to be expanding the parking at all. They have their existing parking areas, and they've got a traffic management plan. So it was determined with that traffic management plan, which takes into effect people going out there with vouchers on days where it's going to be full or nearing capacity. They give them vouchers and say, please come back another day. They're discount vouchers. They've got CHP officers. They've got flashing signs to help people out. It was felt that traffic and parking were reduced to less than significant. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the mitigated neg deck and the errata as set forth in the staff report, and adopt the mitigation monitoring plan, and approve the conditional use permit to allow for the construction and operation of the new chairlift. And I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any
I
questions from the
just
commission?
have one quick question. Lisa, is this chairlift, is it part of a master plan, or was this is like a complete new project? Do they have others, I guess, planned, and this is just one more element, or is this a standalone project?
Well, I think when
The applicant.
Yeah, the applicant would
maybe
like
answer
to address
Okay,
that.
thank you.
So,
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have a brief question. I understand that the California Division of Forestry is going to come up with a conversion plan. But I noticed that in the conditions that it's rather vague as far as revegetation and cleanup and that kind of stuff. And so is the county anticipating that the conversion plan is going to go into the details on that, or you're going to handle the design review committee? It just says landscape architect making plans, basically.
right. Yeah, I would expect the timber harvest plan, timber conversion plan to address those issues.
Like the species of grasses or whatever they're going to plant and that type of stuff? So that's what you're anticipating then? Okay, thank you.
Anyone else on the commission? Thank you, Lisa. You may be called back.
Okay.
If we'll listen from the proponent.
Mr. Chair, Planning Commissioners, Brad Sherhall, TLA Engineering and Planning, 1504 Eureka Road, Suite 110, Roseville, California. Here representing Sugar Bowl Corporation this morning. Some of the questions that you had, I'll attempt to answer just briefly. I just want to let you know that we are seeking approval of a use permit for the construction and operation of this chairlift. And the purpose of the chairlift is to access skier area that skiers currently use much of this area, but the access is limited to people hiking there. For the most part, people like me, I end up not hiking over there. But this would improve access to an area that is, in fact, in the master plan, as you were asking that question. The master plan was approved in, I believe it was 1994. And Sugar Bowl essentially encompasses 4 different mountains. This is the last mountain. This is the Crow's Peak mountainside. And the other 3 are Judah, Lincoln, and Mount Disney. Crow's Peak is the 4th mountain, and that's included in the master plan. And so I just want to reiterate once again that this is a chairlift that would allow access, better access to existing ski area. There's only one new ski run that would be created, but there is an existing ski run that people can use over there now. And there have been people over there skiing in the past. I know that there was actually skiers out there last year that were in the news. As Lisa mentioned, and thank you, Lisa, for your presentation, projects on a combination of USD land and Sugar Bowl land. About 11 acres are tied up in a timber harvest, and that harvest is going to occur under a timber harvest plan that CAL FIRE is administering. And they're also interested in the fact that there's a timber conversion, and what that really means is that the land will no longer be used to grow timber per se, at least for now. The lift design is simple compared to some of the lifts that you might see at other ski areas. This is a non-detachable lift, so the chairs come across at regular speed. They don't get slowed down as they come into the terminal. It's kind of a simple design that way. We're limiting grading at the site, basically minimizing it to that necessary only to put in footings, if you will. They're not going to grade under the terminals. They're going to put snow there to provide a platform for skiers to reach the chair itself. Similar situation at the top terminal where there's actually going to be a ramp that goes down to the ground rather than grading up at the top of the mountain. No grading up there. Once again, grading only limited to what's necessary to put footings in for the towers and the terminal bases, if you will. That is largely it. I know we had the master plan question. I think we addressed that. There was a question about revegetation. There is a set of revegetation requirements that are in the improvement plans. And because the project sort of has two jurisdictions, the CAL FIRE has a jurisdiction, if you will, over the removal of the timber. They have requirements in the timber harvest plan for how revegetation occurs. There are also requirements for improvement plans as to how revegetation occurs for the limited amount of grading. I know that with a timber harvest plan, there are erosion control measures that have to be in place, and I've seen those in the plans. Similarly, in the improvement plans, there are requirements for erosion control, and those are in place in the plans right now. So, with that, I'll close my comments, and certainly we're available to answer questions, and Sugar Bowl Corporation is here also.
Just a little question. I noticed on the ski run, there's one place where the run looks like it encroaches a little bit on one of the presumed wetlands.
Yes.
And it talks about pruning. That
Yes.
sounds kind of, maybe you could explain
that
what
might
you mean by
sound ominous, and we had conversations with our wetlands biologist, Marcus Bowl. Marcus is not here today, but that comment or that question had come up before, and Marcus said, well, we're not doing a fill. What we're doing is doing plant management, if you will, to clean out broken branches and things like that of the plant species that are within that wetland. The wetland itself will not be filled, but the maintenance of the plant life in there is allowed in wetlands. So, excellent question, but that was what Marcus had told us. He told us to say that, and I believe that Marcus is correct about that. Mm-hmm. He certainly has good contacts at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay.
Yep.
And then as far as slash cleanup goes, I presume the harvest plan will cover that.
The harvest plan covers the slash cleanup, yeah. For one thing, Sugar Bowl doesn't want to have stuff out there that becomes a hazard to skiers either, so things will be cleaned up.
So you'll probably be either piling it or broadcast burning it or something like that.
Chris could probably answer that question directly. They're
Chip and haul.
chip and haul.
Chip and haul?
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions? In that case, thank you, and we'll open this part of the meeting to any public comment. Is there anyone here wishing to speak about this? Seeing no one, I'll bring it back to the board and discussion. Straightforward, gentlemen. If not, can we at least receive a motion in some direction, please?
Mr. Chairman, if there are no further questions or comments by any of the commissioners, I'll follow the staff recommendation and recommend that we adopt a mitigated negative deck and errata as set forth in attachment D, and approve the conditional use permit to allow the construction and operation of the new fixed grip triple chairlift and associated ski runs with the findings as listed in the agenda on page 5 and the conditional use permit conditions as also listed. I recommend approval.
Okay, and Paul, if you would enlighten?
Okay?
So be it.
Okay, second?
Moved and seconded. I'll call for a vote. Ayes?
Aye.
Opposed? Can I ski there this winter?
Pardon?
Will I be able to ski there this winter?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
I don't know if there's anyone, I guess no one testified, so no one can appeal, huh?
Okay, I should mention that if anyone should wish to appeal this election or vote, the fee would be $529, and you would see the county clerk about that. You have 10 calendar days to file that appeal. Thank
Do you want this letter from the state, Chris? Or do you have?
Yeah, we can grab whatever you like. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. To review 1756-330, which is also known as the Winery Ordinance of the Placer County Zoning Ordinance. So before I go any further, I just wanted to go over the definition of what a winery is. It means a bonded winery facility comprising the building or buildings used to convert fruit juices, all or part of which are produced on the property, to wine, and to age, bottle, store, distribute, and sell said wine. A winery for the purposes of this section includes crushing, fermenting, re-fermenting, bottling, blending, bulk and bottle storage, aging, shipping, receiving, laboratory equipment and maintenance facilities, sales and administrative office functions, and may include tasting and promotional events. Okay, and it is a workshop, so anytime you want to stop me and ask me questions, feel free to.
Say, George, I was wondering where on the map the winery's going to be built?
Oh, probably down in the village.
That's the drinking part of it.
Go down, ski in.
There we go.
So, it's designed to throw me off my game. So, by way of background, the original winery ordinance that we use in effect today started in 2006. It was brought forward at that time based on the belief that the winery industry was a new and sort of growth industry, and there was questions about how we were going to regulate it. And the board was very concerned that we look at how we're going to regulate it. We looked at the
unique land use issues associated with wineries, such as access on private roads, events, tasting rooms, all those things. They wanted it looked at specifically. They also wanted that surrounding property owners, that their concerns were also taken into account. So essentially what happens, we start in 2006, there's a lot of public workshops, there's a lot of rewrites, and it winds up at the board in August of 2008 and is adopted in its present form. In that time, which has been about 5 years, the Vintners Association, which is a consortium of Placer County wineries, has come forward and they have said, okay, we've had this ordinance for 5 years, and here are some of the issues that we think need to be addressed and possibly refined. And they really fall into essentially three things. They believe that we need to redefine what a promotional event is. They believe that we need to take a look at changing the rules with regard to tasting rooms, and they also need to. They also think that we need to maybe look at how many promotional events we allow and how we go about restricting those promotional events. So more specifically, a promotional event today is defined as an event sponsored by the property owner, an association of agricultural property owners, or similar organizations formed to assist the agricultural industry in the area to promote the sale of Placer County wines, and which is intended to allow the sampling and direct marketing and sales of wines produced on the premises or produced elsewhere. Such events include winemakers' dinners. That's the definition today of promotional events. The proposed by the Vintners Association for promotional events means an event sponsored by the property owner, an association of agricultural property or winery owners, or similar organizations formed to assist the agricultural industry in the area to promote the sale of Placer County wines, and which is intended to allow for the sampling and direct marketing and sales of wine produced on the premises or produced elsewhere from grapes grown on sites. Such events may include winemakers' dinners or events that feature wine and food pairings. Promotional events shall include small events, large events, and temporary events. So the major change there, and I know they sound very similar except for the small, large, and temporary events, is that a promotional event is anything that features food and wine pairings. The definition we have now does not say that. So there's this ongoing debate about what a promotional event is. In this new proposed definition, a promotional event is simply something that features food and wine pairing, and that is the test at which it becomes a promotional event. They would like a small event is a promotional event. I'm going to go through what the events would be on their proposal. A small event is a promotional event that is attended by less than 50 people at one time on a winery located on less than 5 acres, or a promotional event that is attended by less than 100 people at one time on a winery located on 5 acres or more. Excuse me, I need to get a drink quickly. A large event is a promotional event that is attended by more than 50 people at one time on a winery located on less than 5 acres, or a promotional event that is attended by less than 100 people or more at one time on a winery located on 5 acres or more. And then a temporary event is a large or small event of limited duration that may include meeting, fundraisers, or weddings that are incidental to the main purpose of producing wine at the facility. If any buildings are used for the event, such uses shall not exceed the occupancy load. In addition to that change, the other thing that they're proposing is that a promotional event, a winery should be allowed an unlimited amount of small events and up to 12 large events as a matter of right. If a winery owner would like to have more than 12 large events, approval of an administrative review permit would be required. So the other thing that I alluded to that they are concerned about is the tasting room requirements. Currently, our tasting room requirements allow for the sampling of wine. I think about a year and a half ago, the Alcohol Beverage Control of California changed the regulations that say wine tasting rooms can now offer wine by the glass and by the bottle for consumption on site. So that was a fundamental change in the state law, and the wineries would like us to adopt the state regulations. So with that, we did go out and look at a few other counties to see how they're handling the winery issue. The 3 counties that we chose to look at this time were Amador County, Sacramento County, and Santa Barbara County. Amador County because they have a lot of the same challenges that we have with regard to wineries. They're similar in nature. They're a close-by neighbor. Sacramento County we chose because they're also close by, and they've also adopted a new agro-tourism ordinance to deal with all sorts of agro-tourism issues, and they adopted that in 2011. And Santa Barbara we chose because they also have a very in-depth and complete ordinance that was adopted in 2007 to deal with this. So just a quick overview of the counties that we looked at. Amador County Winery Ordinance permits an unlimited number of events per year, less than 125 people, and social gatherings, which is just any type of event in their zoning ordinance, or weddings for up to 450 persons with a maximum of 12 events per year, with no more than 4 such events per month on a winery. So if you exceed those limitations, then you would be required to get a use permit. The one thing that is different between Placer County and Amador County is you can't have a winery in Amador County unless you have 40 acres or more. So they tend to be on larger pieces of property in a more rural setting. With regard to Sacramento County, Amador with their wine tasting regulations are consistent with the state. So you can sample, you can buy by the glass or by the bottle for consumption on site. Sacramento County has a little bit more in-depth sliding scale. They start at 1 to 2.5 acres. You can have 50 people at an event. 2.5 to 5, 100 people. 5 to 10, 200 people. 10 to 20, 300 people. Over 20 acres, 350 people. If any of those lines are crossed, you need a use permit. They also allow their wine tasting rooms to conform to the state law with regard to bottle or wine by the glass for sale on site. Santa Barbara County, I'm not going to go into Santa Barbara too much. Theirs is pretty self-explanatory. They have a very in-depth scale about if you're this size, you can have this many events, and you can or cannot have a wine tasting room. I will say their wine tasting room regulations are in line with the state if they're allowed on site. Sometimes they don't even allow tasting rooms on some of their wineries if they're too small. But generally speaking, if they are allowed a tasting room, it does conform to the current state regulations. So with regard to other jurisdiction, it appears that other jurisdictions have gone into much more depth, and they do tend, under certain circumstances, to be a little less restrictive with regard to promotional events than we are, and with regard to tasting room regulations. So with that, in conclusion, I would tell you what we brought forward today are the things that the Vintners Association has been requesting that we bring forward. We would expect as we go through the process, and there is a timeline contained in the staff report that talks about having 3 or 4 workshops before you, going to the max, going to the board, coming back with an ordinance. We would expect that while this staff report looks like we're only presenting the Vintners Association at this point, which we are, that as we go through the process, that it will be a much broader perspective, and that we will start addressing all issues brought forward by people, and that the ordinance will reflect that public process. That's all I have, unless you have any questions.
I do.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
I had a question. Go ahead.
Oh, what? See, I just wanted to be clear on the proposal here. You mentioned the large and the small.
Right.
In the temporary. Under the temporary, I didn't hear you mention if there's any limits placed on that, or is it just kind of?
A temporary event, you'd be required to get a temporary outdoor event permit through us.
Okay.
It is a little confusing. I think as you go through and you started to refine it, that
that language, it says it can be any small or large event, but normally, if you adopted this in the format that they have proposed, you probably would never have a temporary outdoor event permit for a small event because you have an unlimited amount. So those are some of the things that would need to be refined. And so let me just be really clear. It's not staff's position that we should be adopting any of these things.
Microphone a little bit more.
It's not staff's position that we should be adopting any of these things at this point. What we're simply saying is these are the things that we've been asked to bring forward to you to get your opinion about a direction that we should go with regard to the winery ordinance at this time. These are just the concerns and the wishes of the Vintners Association.
Maybe one more quick question, too,
Yeah.
on the administrative use permits. That's, for now, consistent with what the existing community plan would do, or is it inconsistent?
I'm not sorry, I'm not sure I follow. You mean administrative review permits are required for promotional events, up to 6 promotional events a year?
And that's consistent with what the current community center requires, too?
No, community centers require use permits for community centers to go forward. They are one level up from administrative review permit. They don't have the option of getting an administrative review permit for a community center.
So as proposed, it's a different.
It is different. I think the confusion comes in, if you are a winery, you can get an administrative review permit and have 6 promotional events. If you want to exceed that under our current ordinance, then you would have to go in and get a use permit for a community center, which we're also going through the process of looking at, as you know, and we'll be back with a second cut on that. And it would be distinct and a separate use from the winery. Okay. It would be based on its merits with regard to having events, which frankly may or may not be related to the winery. It doesn't necessarily, if you're a community center, wouldn't necessarily have to meet the same standards as the promotional events under our current ordinance.
Okay. And so the change here is the temporary events would be
I think the change
different for wineries than the community centers, as they exist now and as this proposal is written.
Right. Temporary events I don't think would really play too much into this. I think what you would find is that you redefine, you have small events and large events. And then you, the Vintners Association has access to make a determination about if a winery is this, how many small events can they have? And the only regulation with regard to the small event would be the number of people and that they have food and wine pairings. Same with large events. It's just a greater number of people and food and wine pairings. Right now, if you have a winery, if you have an administrative review permit, you're allowed 6 promotional events maximum.
Okay. Mr. Maybe one more quick question, too.
Yes.
You know, kind of comparing the pieces here to understand, and understanding this is where we are now, not necessarily where we're going to end up.
Right.
Let's say you grow mandarins and you want to have and you produce jams or some other product out of the mandarins, and you want to have a food and mandarin pairing at your place. Would that require a community center approval process?
No, and that's something that we expect to come through when we start talking about the winery ordinance, that there may be a need to address the wineries in a larger framework like Sacramento County has done and create an agro-tourism type ordinance that talks about if you're a producer of grapes or wines or mandarins or things like that, that you have different regulations. That's something that might come out of this process as well. I don't know if the standards would be the same. I haven't really gotten that far. I do know that other counties, specifically Sacramento County, took a look at the whole gambit, and wineries are one section of their agro-tourism ordinance. So that's something that may come out of this process as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Denio has...
You know, when you started off your presentation, you gave the definition of a winery, and that's, I'm assuming, how it pertains to the county in this ordinance. I didn't hear anything about the acreage component of it, or maybe I missed it when you.
No,
talked.
I gave you an, not a super specific requirement with regard to wineries. There are acreage components with regard to wineries. There are crop requirements, minimum acreage required for wineries. I believe that the minimum size for a winery in the county right now is 4.6 acres. I also believe
1 acre.
1 acre of vines is required. I'm not sure if you need it for the startup, but you at least need to have plans to plant them or have planted them. There's also some discussion in the winery ordinance about where the grapes need to come from. District 10, which consists of Placer, Nevada, El Dorado, Amador, Tuolumne, and Mariposa counties. So there are some other more specific regulations in the ordinance with regard to wineries and size.
And then with that component, so saying that 4.5 acre with 1 acre of grapes is the smallest then in this component.
Right.
You have, you know, the minimum amount of people that can be on site for events.
Yeah, and I think and that would be when we go through the process, we'd start looking at what we think is appropriate or not. Maybe some performance criteria. If you have 10 acres and you know you're in West Placer and you're surrounded by open land, it might, and you front right on a county road, it might be more appropriate to look at a different level of events and size that you could have versus someone who lives in a lot of sort of 4.6 acre parcels at the end of a private road. It might not be so appropriate for them to have events that of a large nature. So those are all things that we have to go through when we go through this process and hopefully get direction from you, hear from the public, and start formulating some idea of the best direction to take this section of the zoning ordinance. Did I answer your questions? I felt like I rambled there a little.
Yeah, no, it answered. Actually, I guess just one of my comments would be, Rich sort of alluded to it with mandarin growers or whatever when we go through this process. I mean, as we're talking and taking in comments and stuff, that whether it's the wineries, I mean, other than the alcohol component of it, if it's the mandarins, it could be any other growers that as we go through this, that for size and scope of events and stuff, that I think we need to sort of look at it as a whole. In other words, don't just put wineries on it.
Right.
I mean,
So,
this component might be strictly for wineries, but I mean,
Right.
operations of any agricultural growers would have the rights. I mean, keep that in mind.
yeah, I think it might be a logical extension to think that, a mandarin farmers very well might want to have some events to promote their products during a harvest festival and that sort of thing. So that is definitely something we can look at, a more comprehensive agricultural type tourism ordinance.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Jeffrey?
George, when you looked at Lake Amador and the other Sacramento County and such, do they address, and you touched on a little bit, the access roads?
Yeah, they do. Interestingly, I was hoping someone would bring that up, or I was going to try to work it in somewhere. The interesting thing is Amador County has a policy that if you're a winery on a private road, that you have to bring to the county a signed agreement between all the property owners that says, I have the ability to have my winery on this private road, which in other words gives everyone in the neighborhood a chance to work it out and see if they can come to some kind of private agreement about what they do or don't think is right. If you cannot produce that document, then Amador County requires you to get a use permit. And as you know, a use permit elevates you to the possibility of having to do environmental review. It also elevates you to the possibility that there can be requirements so that the county could make the findings that you're not going to endanger the health, safety, or general welfare of surrounding property owners, which would give us the ability to look at it and say, okay, you have a private road, It's 10 feet wide. It has no shoulders. It has bad sight distance down on the county road. Here are the things that we think you need to do based on your project description.
Well, and I guess I was looking even for one step further, and that is the county roads that feed these. You know, you were talking about one place had a size restriction were for 40 acres, and initially that bigger sounds maybe better, but your larger parcels in this county are going to be tucked down more roads that are less capable of handling the traffic than where we would probably ideally like to see these things put. And so there's a balance there, I guess, that needs to be addressed as far as size and relation to the roads that are going to get people to and from.
And those could fall under performance criteria, or some kind of criteria that you could possibly put in that if you want to have events, you need to have these set of circumstances to have this many events and that sort of thing. Those are all things that we could look at as well, if it pleases the commission.
That was mine. Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions?
Yes, George, I've got a couple of questions for you. One is a common issue that we have with event centers, community centers, is enforcement. And you had mentioned, I think, when we had our last public hearing on the issue of the event centers, that you were formulating sort of a plan of how to address the after hours, because that's obviously when most of these events are happening. And we need to have some vehicle for the neighbors to be able to contact someone if there's an issue. Have you come up with some sort of a plan of how to address that?
I haven't, yeah, that is the biggest issue for staff to address, is with regard to wineries and community centers, there's a sense that these things take place on the weekend, and if it takes place on the weekend, there is no one at the county to address it.
Right.
So what we've come up with is we've come up with a couple of scenarios that when we come back on community centers, some of these things we were going to present. Obviously, the first one is we have to look from a staffing perspective of having people available on the weekend. Who is that going to be? It could be someone, it could be, there's a couple possibilities. We could have code enforcement officers on call. That's a possibility. We could talk to the sheriff's department and open up a dialogue with them and have some specially trained officers who are out and about anyways, who could be first responders, and go out and look at this thing, take notes, kind of know what our ordinance was. We could give them some training, and they could go out and look, and then they could accurately report back to us, so it's not sort of an after-the-fact situation. There could be that. It could be a joint effort between code enforcement and the sheriff's department, could rotate. So we're looking at some things like that. The bottom line is we have to figure out how to create staff for the weekends, and we are looking at those options to address the issues that might be associated with this.
Seems like the sheriff direction might be a more viable one, because there already, as you say, on
They generally tend to get more respect than
yeah, that's true.
when a planner type shows up on the weekend. Right.
My other question is related to parking, because they, as I understand, they're required to provide parking on their property for events and just ongoing operation. But when you think about the minimum acreage of, let's say, 4.6, and we're requiring 1 acre of grapes to be grown on the property, and then you have the structures. If you're going to have an event where you're going to have 50 people, and maybe if, let's say, it's over 5 acres, it's slightly over 5 acres, you could potentially have 100 people. I'm not sure it's really viable that you're going to have a parking area that you can provide for accommodate 100 people. I mean, I think that's something that needs to be looked at. And I know that, as I understand, the language basically says that, again, they're to provide parking on their property, but we know that people will park where they want to park. And I think that it should go further than that. It should say that there will be no parking on roads, be it private or public roads, because that creates a hazard both for the neighbors, and it creates a hazard for potentially the emergency vehicles that may be trying to get through that area. So I think it needs to be clearer, in my opinion.
Okay.
Question along the parking lines. Would they be permitted if they chose to, I guess, to bus people in with park off-site and bring them in by, is that an option?
It's always an option. I mean, if you're having an event that is legal on a certain site, but you don't have adequate parking, you always have the option of finding a parking lot somewhere that you have an agreement with and shuttling someone in. It's definitely something that we could look at as part of the parking requirements, that there's a potential for busing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think as these numbers get up, as we outlined, close to 100 or that kind of thing, that it may be that that's going to have to be an attachment or a requirement when they get over a certain number, because I think they do cause a lot of parking problems in some of these small, tight communities. I also like the idea of maybe as we go through this process of including other types of farm produce and products that might be, I see more and more small acreage farms that are growing commodities for the farmers markets and stuff, and they might reach the point where they want to have, if they have the ideal situation, something similar to the wine thing.
Right.
You wouldn't have the alcoholic issue, but or it might be a combination. It could be a combination of maybe two different kinds of farms going together. And
Definitely something we can look at. And
thank you.
We could also look at the parking and have more specifics with regard to parking requirements, servicing requirements. We can look at all those sorts of things. And
I think too, as we go through the wine ordinance, there should be an example of the tasting that we should have at each planning commission hearing, so we know what we're talking about.
Go a second.
Might degenerate into non-productivity.
I was with you until that last comment, but I just want to make just one quick comment. I think the traffic safety and general welfare of a neighborhood is really important, and I hope we get a lot of comments today as well in future. But this whole word unlimited scares me. Unlimited to me means free for all. I mean, it may not be equal, but if you have 50 people unlimited on every night you could have somebody coming down a road, whether it's approved, a good road or just a substandard road. But I really think we need to address this business about unlimited, no matter what size we're talking about, because I wouldn't even want my neighbors in my residential neighborhood in Roseville to have a party every night. Once in a while for graduation or weddings or receptions, or you have people over for dinner. There's no problem with that, obviously.
Right.
But unlimited?
Yeah.
Your neighbors already don't
Well, it's unlimited. You're basically saying then it's like a parking Safeway or any place else. It's unlimited. That means every day you can have that parking lot full of people, whatever size parking lot it is, whether it's a small one or a large one. And so I really think that's a big issue with me, the word unlimited. Not that I'm in favor of super government regulation, but I think that word unlimited needs to be studied a little bit more carefully. Thank you.
We can do that.
Any more questions or comments from you?
One comment in looking at this, because I know we talk about 50 or 100 people, and we don't really talk about parking spaces or parking availability, because I think there's a difference between a shopping center where they have a parking field for, 400 cars or whatever, depending on the square footage and stuff in use. And I guess I've never heard, at least in this context, of either for acreage or size of the winery and stuff, parking requirements, specific parking requirements, whether it's 10 spaces and you can have, once the 10 spaces are filled, your venue's filled, so you have 20, 30 people or whatever. What would constitute, if you had an event of 50, how many vehicles is that? Is that 2 people per car? Or?
It's promotional event parking. The current ordinance requires 1 space per 2.5. So if you have 25 people, my simple math is going to fail me, but I think it's around 9-ish.
25 would be 10.
Okay, George, just a question now. If Placer County Vintners Association did not come to the county, would we be having this meeting?
If the Vintners Association had not come to the county,
Would we be having this discussion?
this is a question I can't answer for you.
Okay, well, might I, in
And I wasn't trying to sidestep it, I honestly don't know.
Okay, well, what I'm getting at is that rather than perhaps confine ourselves to the wine ordinance, that, as other members have mentioned, it seems to be more that the agricultural events, with wineries being part of them, might be the way to basically look at this, simply because if we do pass these and re-advise the ordinance for the wineries, that indeed Mandarin growers may come in and say, well, we'd like to have a similar kind of a thing, and I think it might be juxtaposed that if we just set one thing for the entire agricultural community with specifics for vintners or something else, that might be a little more conducive to the entire county.
Discussion
Okay.
over soon.
So, more like an agro-tourism ordinance, like I alluded
Yeah,
to
it
earlier.
might be, I think we might find it more comprehensive as we go down the road,
Right,
benefit other
Little food
agriculture.
pairing with it.
okay.
And one more, just kind of a question or comment or caution, I guess. When we talk about parking, oftentimes, when I've attended whatever types of events out in the agricultural zone, oftentimes there's kind of a field that may normally have cattle or horses in it, and they just turn that into a parking lot. So if we get too uptowny in terms of, you know, like in a shopping center, get too uptowny in terms of parking lots, we may just eliminate altogether the opportunity for people to have events in the agricultural zoning area. So that would be a caution.
Yeah, when we look at the parking requirements, we can look at all the options, and we're happy to bring those back to you to present them. There are options for overflow parking, like you said, just fields and that sort of thing that are mowed down short enough so there's not a fire problem. There's gravel overflow. There's all sorts of things that we could bring back
Okay.
for your, thank you, review.
Any other questions?
One last thing, and I mentioned this in the event center, community center. One thing that I'm really sensitive to is weddings. You know, and obviously these wineries, some of them are rather elaborate and are certainly conducive to having a wedding event. And I assume that they could say they could do a kind of a wine pairing for a wedding, but that's really not the main intent of a wedding. So is there any room for kind of them to do this sort of thing? Because I certainly wouldn't want that in there. I mean, that's all my personal.
So what the Vintners Association has said is
The noise that comes from it.
a promotional event is
Later.
any event that has wine and food pairings. Okay, that's the test.
Okay.
So yes, a wedding would fit under that proposed definition. Our current definition has a little bit more latitude with regard to staff. It's one of the problems that we have encountered. Staff says a promotional event for the wine. So, and it doesn't ever actually say what is promotional. I can tell you, I think for sure a promotional event would be like a harvest festival at a winery. That's for sure. It's like we're harvesting our grapes, come try our things. But then you get into, well, I'm going to have this party and I'm featuring my wine, but it really doesn't have much to do about the wine. Is that a promotional event or not? The ordinance is a little gray on that. Well, not a little gray. It doesn't really define what promotional means. And that's one of the things as we go through the process that we would very much like to figure out what constitutes promotional, what doesn't constitute promotional. Where that falls, I don't know at this point. That will be up to you and the board.
Anyone else?
Just another thought. Another thought. Since we're bringing up the noise element, which always comes up, noise is a pretty common thing that we hear about. And
Right.
when you get into the enforcement standpoint, you know, you can see, you know, on a weekend a deputy sheriff going out and saying it's noisy, but about all the deputy sheriff would be able to do, I think, unless he's got a decibel meter, is ask him to quiet down.
Right.
And so in order to really enforce the noise, you'd have to properly equip whoever's going to go out and sample it and be able to actually get a measurement before you could effectively enforce it. You just thought.
Yeah. What I would tell you is when the noise ordinance was originally adopted, the first responders were the deputy sheriff's were supposed to go out on noise complaints. They also were equipped with decibel meters. I don't know if they still have access to those or not. Last time I discussed that with them through the Code Enforcement Division, I got some blank stares. But they are supposed to be the first responders. They are supposed to have decibel meters. They are supposed to be able to walk up to the property line and hold it out and be able to tell you what the noise is at the receiving property line. So those are all things that as we go through this process that we'll need to reiterate, like I was alluding to about enforcement, and come up with a plan to deal with that.
Thank you. Any other questions, discussion, comments? Okay, and this time I'm going to open it up to the public for comment. I'll ask you to do a couple of things for me. One, keep your comments brief and to the point. And two, please give your name when you come up. And
Mr. Chairman, I might mention, I believe there's a sign-in sheet up at the front there,
okay.
too.
That would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Lori Lewis. I live at 6245 Wise Road. I've come before you several times, and it's always regarding the winery issue that I've encountered over the last 3 years and the loud music. I've just recently filed another complaint regarding that. My comment today regarding the vintner's request to change the winery ordinance will be short but not so sweet. Prior to 2008, the Vintners Association worked with the Board of Supervisors to come up with the current ordinances regarding the wine and its productions. Now, in 2013, they are requesting revision to their ordinances with the excuse that their ordinances are too restrictive. I've asked Planning Department for copies of all permits that were applied for by the wineries, whether it was an outdoor permit or a promotional event. How many have the wineries actually filed for? I haven't got an answer back, but I don't think there are many. So what we have here is the vintners made their own rules, then they didn't follow them, and now they're asking for fewer restrictions. My opinion is we should use the current ordinances designed by the vintners and enforced by the county and concentrate the planning's efforts in defining community centers. That's where our foresight needs to be, and let's see if the vintners can go by their own restrictions that they set for themselves. Thank you.
Patricia Burke, 1700 Country Hill Run, Newcastle. In reading the Cedra report of June 13th pertaining to winery ordinance amendments, I'm struck by the fact that the primary inputs have come from the winery task force, with a nod to other stakeholders by holding this workshop to allow public comment. I would like to suggest that the Planning Commission instructs Cedra to consider input from a coalition of concerned citizens in equal measure as given to the winery task force, with Cedra acting as the reconciling body. 3 minutes in front of the Planning Commission is not adequate to address the issues that have been raised continuously, among them traffic, noise, code enforcement, public safety, siting, and density. I also asked the Planning Commission to instruct Cedra to coordinate the winery ordinance amendments with any and all changes to the community center designation, since there is certainly a confluence between the two issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you sign in?
No, I didn't.
If you would.
I have a handout too. Susan Ames, Wise and Gold Hill. And I was going to be very, very brief and wrote most of what I'm trying, most of what I had to say in a handout for you. And I will still be brief, but a couple of things came up when I was listening to George that really kind of caught my attention. The first is, this is the first time I've heard what the wineries are asking for now. And while it's true that all the agricultural uses should be included, the wineries are different because they have a cachet. I used to have Angora goats. I could have had a felt or fleecing comparison event that wouldn't draw the people the same way a wine tasting did. If I had dairy goats and wanted a milk tasting, it's not going to draw people the way wine tasting does. So there is a difference. But I think that's why when this goes forward, we need to have people that have other ag businesses in the workshop giving their point of view and not just what the wineries want. I know George mentioned that too, and so did Carol. But I think it's important to remember that we need other input, because that's kind of a whole separate idea. The second thing is that I was struck with talking about having to put on extra staff for oversight on the weekends. As has come up before, the noise problem, the traffic problem, the parking problem, the enforcement problem. To me, all of these things address a commercial use, not an agricultural use, certainly not a residential area. This is all what you would hear if you were talking about commercial uses, which is, we're very, very close to that line. The promotional idea for wineries has really been stretched. Well, there's one website, I want to get this right. Their promotional event is a therapeutic oils and body applicator event. Now, how that can...
Where is that? Oh.
I can give you the date if you wanted to sign up. I think it's a ladies' night, but that might make it more fun for you.
Yeah.
But to stretch that to the point of promoting your winery is really getting laughable. So I think we need to be really careful about what we allow. Now, the idea of getting people into the area for agritourism is great. But to do that, I think you're better off to have these kind of events, the weddings, all the things that are promoting the problems that we're worried about, in a central, accessible location, in a commercial area with site sharing, time sharing between the wineries, where people can come in, if you're concerned about agritourism, and see what else is available in the area. We have to remember that this is agricultural residential zoning, not agricultural commercial zoning, no matter how far somebody might want to stretch it. So that's all I wanted to bring before you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, I am Rosemarie LaRocca, and I own the property at 6040 Weiss Road, and have owned it for many years and plan to keep it in the Ferrera family, just for the record. I agree with everything everyone has said today, especially the concerns about traffic and about noise and about safety and about our roads and about who's going to look after this and what's it going to cost the county. And I just want to take a moment to direct your attention to page 41, where they talk about Santa Barbara. I recognize that George gave Santa Barbara a light touch, but one of the things that it says on page 41 is about design standards. And while I am directly affected at my home on Wise Road by all the things we've just mentioned, I'm also affected by design, but I believe that the consistency within the county about design is just as important. So I wholeheartedly request, with all due respect, that we really allow some collaboration, not only between the wineries, but between the residents and people who use their homes for rural agricultural, but not a winery. I think it's really important that it all get coordinated. It's happened. We have wineries. They're beautiful. They contribute to our county. However, it affects all of us, and it's very important that our needs be considered as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again. My name is Carol Rubin. I'm from 2079 Country Hill Run in Newcastle. I want to thank the commissioners by expressing the points that you've expressed already. You've shortened my remarks considerably. I would like to make a couple of suggestions that I hope can facilitate this process. No one here is objecting to a winery. A winery is a place where grapes are grown, processed, and sold. That's an agricultural process by any definition. Somehow, though, over the years, wineries have been conflated with this idea that they're also an entertainment venue. That's the part that's not agricultural. And in fact, we end up with the prospect for a lot of these places that the real cash cow that's bringing in the big bucks is the entertainment, not the growing, processing, and sale of grapes. And when we're in agricultural zoning, I think we want to be very careful about that. So I would like to suggest to the commissioners and to the people in planning that we just separate these two. There is nothing wrong with treating growing and processing of grapes any way you would, any differently from you would mandarin oranges or cattle or any other agricultural product. But when it comes to having the promotional events and tasting rooms that are getting dangerously close to restaurants, I think we want to handle that under what's being called now the community center ordinance, but maybe should just be an event ordinance or an agritourism ordinance, and not have separate requirements here for wineries that are different from other people in ag zoning. So that a winery who wants to grow grapes and have what's the equivalent of a roadside stand where they can sell their products should be able to do it like any other agricultural producer. But once they want to start having wine food pairings, winemakers dinners, and so-called promotional events, whether they're wine-related or not, then they should have to apply to be an event center, just like a cattle raiser or a mandarin grower or somebody who does neither, a private citizen. And so I think we can maybe avoid reinventing the wheel and having two different kinds of tracks here for wineries and then everybody else by separating out the event component. I'd really strongly suggest that we look at that and simplify our lives. I'd also like to just take a look at the current winery code. Right in the very first section where it says purpose. The ultimate sentence in that purpose is protect the agricultural character and long-term agricultural production of agricultural lands. This is something I think everybody can agree on, that we want to preserve and protect what's really valuable in Placer County, which is our agricultural ambience and our agricultural lands. And by having large swaths of it covered with parking lots, so that each individual tiny little winery could have its each individual tiny little tasting room that people then drive around like pinball games from winery to winery, is not making a whole lot of sense. And I think when we devise these ordinances for event centers or agritourism, the county can do a lot to encourage the location of common facilities where several wineries get together and have their tasting rooms in an event center in a nice parcel that's close to the freeway, that's not interfering with the neighbors, where maybe they can have outdoor amplified music and a big parking lot. And there are plenty of these places available. I can show you several beautiful commercial parcels in Newcastle that have gorgeous vistas and would make wonderful event centers. And so I strongly encourage maybe everybody here to maybe start thinking a little bit differently about this and preserving and protecting the agricultural character and long-term agricultural production of Placer County lands. And I want to thank you again.
Thank you.
Hello, Teresa Cheney. I'm at Schindler and Gold Hill in Newcastle, and I wanted to say that I absolutely agree with everything Carol said. I wanted to say that I'm really happy to hear the issues that have been raised by the commission and by George, and they're taking a look at it. I'm glad that you guys are doing this sort of parallel to the event center whether you incorporate the two, as Carol may suggest, or whether you just recognize that there is this scope, because we already have wineries in the queue currently applying for community center permits, because apparently the lack of definition of a community center currently, now of course we're in a pending mode now with the moratorium, but it is attracted wineries to now apply for community centers. So you can see, if it's going to be used as the end run anyway, let's look at it comprehensively together, side by side. So I'm really glad that we either do that in conjunction with or comprehensively under one title, as the event center would be. I like what they're having to say. I'm so happy to hear from all of you that you seem to be sensitive to the very things that we as rural residents and agricultural representatives are here to speak to today. And it's also raised a couple of questions. I was just wondering, in terms of something like the agricultural events, like a mandarin grower, somebody who was not winery, then maybe how does the special permit or temporary use permit kind of weigh into the picture on all of this? And I was also wondering, is there, in Carol's scenario, it's kind of neat to think that maybe the vintners, having a certain amount of unity in what they're all proposing, could really benefit from a cooperative that was maybe near a much more major arterials or freeways or whatever, and have it as a cooperative, and yet each of the different vineyards would, in a sense, be promoted and maybe be allowed, smaller events and pairings, but the actual wine tasting events and large-scale events would be not in these rural roads and these rural conditions that have such. And I like the fact that we're taking a look at enforcement, and that was brought up, and it was brought up with some really serious taking a look, because that's going to be key to all of this. I actually wonder if their wineries a little bit are different, not only in, let's say, fleecing sheep or agricultural events, but that alcohol component does make it sort of its own little subgroup, I think, which is something that I'm sure you guys will be considering as you're taking a look at a lot of this. It's just something I wanted to mention, because yes, it's agricultural. I absolutely am here to say that I'm concerned about preserving the agricultural lands of Placer County. It's the goose that lays the golden egg, as they say. We don't want to spoil that. But I also recognize that for agricultural viability, a lot of these folks are saying we need to have a secondary commerce and a secondary income. I'm here to say I think there are solutions for both. I think, yes, let's find a way that we can help supplement these agricultural endeavors such that they aren't just withering, or they aren't, not making a profit or whatever, because of course that is part of preserving the agricultural lands, is their economic viability. I get that. But I do think there are solutions as we step back a little bit and take a look comprehensively, as been suggested, that will serve that and protect some of these safeguards. And there may be simpler solutions, as Carol's speaking to, that would in a sense, resolve a lot of the restrictions and hair splitting and sliding scales of parkings for attendees, and there may be things that address that. So I appreciate very much your guys' serious concern on this, and hearing from folks other than the vintners.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Don't forget to sign in.
Oh, yeah. I was also thinking maybe the vintners would be willing to pay for a 1-800 number on weekends or something for code enforcement. What do you think?
Good morning. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Cindy Fake, and I'm the Horticulture and Small Farms Advisor in the Farm Advisors Department, the University of California Cooperative Extension. Horticulture does include grape production. And I'd like to speak to some of the comments that have been made. I appreciate the last speaker that did mention agricultural economic viability. Agritourism, a number of people have said that that's a really good thing, but have sort of ignored some of the realities of agritourism. And I'll be frank, this is not the first commission that I've spoken to about agricultural tourism at. I've spoken at it in actually 4 other counties when they were working on agricultural tourism initiatives. And the idea that it could take place in a commercial area is completely contrary to the entire purpose for agricultural tourism. Visitors who are coming as agri-tourists want to see the farm, the ranch, and that includes vineyards. Vineyards are farms by definition. They want to see where the crop is grown, where the wine is made. Yes, you can have winery tasting rooms in commercial areas, but the reality is that is much less of a draw than a farm that is producing the product. So you would be losing a great deal of sales by having that commercial tasting room and not allowing people to see where the vineyard is, where the grapes are grown, learn about how they're grown. So that's one point. People are saying they don't object to wineries, but they object to the entertainment component of it. The reality is, in the United States today, more than 90% of all farms must have off-farm income in order to survive economically. Why do we expect Placer County to be any different? Why are farms and ranches looking at agritourism, looking at entertainment as a means of income? Because otherwise they have to work off the farm. And if we are to have long-term agriculture in this county, we have to have a broader view of what agriculture is. And the reality is today, across the country, if you read the Ag Alert, if you read the Vegetable Growers News, if you read the Fruit Growers News, the front cover 3 weeks out of 4 has something about agricultural tourism, because it's essential to agriculture, to agricultural viability in this country today. We cannot have farmers and ranchers who are economically viable just selling and possibly processing a crop as a grape grower would do. It's just not economically viable, because Americans will not pay the real price for the cost of producing agricultural products. We pay a tiny percentage. We pay less than 9% of our annual income for our food and agricultural products. The rest of the world pays over 20% of their annual income, and our income is way higher than a lot of the rest of the world. So the realities of agriculture in this country today mean that farmers and ranchers have to have a broader view of what constitutes agriculture. And I would just ask that you consider that, and consider, if we want to continue to have this agricultural ambiance, the rural way of living, if you want to preserve those agricultural lands, you have to preserve the farmers and ranchers. You're not going to preserve them if they cannot make a living at it. I mean, how many of you would have a job where you lose money every year? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments before I close off to the public?
I'd like to speak. My name's Jeff Evans. I'm with Bear River Winery in Meadow Vista. Probably the smallest winery in Placer County at 4.6 acres. I'm a startup, just started up last year. The winery ordinance that you guys passed in 2007 eliminated me from even having a winery on my property. My property is zoned resort. I'm adjacent to the Bear River and Lake Combi and industrial zone land with a gravel pit quarry, a concrete batch plant, and an asphalt plant right next door to me. But I was not allowed to have a winery on my property to process grapes with your ordinance. I was able to get the planning department to give me a letter of determination after looking at my particular case to allow me to have a winery. But another thing that's in the winery ordinance is this 1 acre of grapes. My property has beautiful oak trees on it currently, and I have 4.73 acres. I also raise American blackbelly sheep on the property, and so I'm looking at having to cut down 50 or 60 oak trees in order to plant an acre of grapes, even though I'm sourcing grapes from Placer County and from El Dorado County vineyards. to produce wine on my property. My passion is making wine and drinking wine. You know, I've gone to UC Davis. I've spent a lot of money there learning how to make wine. But we seem to think that this is an agricultural farm zone kind of endeavor. And if you just go across the river into Nevada County, you'll see Nevada City Winery in downtown Nevada City. They don't have an acre of grapes there. They're on commercially zoned property. They have a tasting room there. They manufacture wine or produce wine there, bottle it there. They taste it there. So there are other types of circumstances for being a winery, I think, than just what our current ordinance allows or what a more restrictive ordinance might allow in the future. Our Ag Commissioner, Joshua Hunsinger, gave me an article that I'd like to give you a copy of. You guys can look at later from the Napa Valley Register. And it says for last year in 2012, Napa County benefited from an economic impact of $13 billion from the wine industry. $13 billion. And it provided 46,000 jobs locally in Napa County that are wine related, and over 100,000 jobs in California that are a direct result of the wine industry in Napa County. And these aren't, you know, just bartenders and fruit pickers. These are chemists, viticulturists, physicists, marketing, sales, agribusiness. You know, there's a lot of really good, high quality, high income jobs that are provided by the wine industry in that county. Here in Placer County, we're a fledgling, you know, startup industry. We have 18 wineries, I think, currently. Some are as small as me, and I've only made $1,200 so far selling wine. But I've invested tens of thousands of dollars trying to learn how to make wine and to buy grapes and buy all the equipment that I need to do this. I think that when you guys are going through this whole ordinance, you really should consider, you know, fostering and encouraging this industry instead of restricting it and trying to suppress it in Placer County, because I think it provides a lot of opportunity for our citizens here in this county. Anyway, that's basically all I had to say.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was glad that finally a winery stepped up to talk about this because I have a couple of quick questions and I'm hoping you can answer that for me. Yes. As I look at these wineries, obviously many of them are very small, and so the viability is always going to be a challenge of these from an economic standpoint. It appears to me that these are more of a passion for the process more than looking at the bottom line financially. That's my own perception from the outside.
Certainly for me, and as mentioned previously, I have a day job. I'm in the tech industry. I've worked for HP in Roseville, Cisco in San Jose. I mean,
so it's a passion. It's a passion.
Yes.
The question I would have is, as the requirement now is to have a minimum of an acre of grapes on your property, what is the reasonable expectation of how many bottles you can generate off of an acre of grapes? Do you have any kind of a range of what you could generate?
In Placer County, you know, we don't get really good tonnage. Here, you know, if you go down to Southern California, you might be able to get 8 tons per acre. In this region, Joshua tells me that we're lucky to get about 2 tons per acre. 2 tons, 1 ton is 50 cases, so 2 tons is about 100 cases of wine. So you're talking about 1,200 bottles of wine, and you know, at 12,000 bottles of wine. No, that's no, excuse me, 1,200. You know, the average price of a bottle of wine in this region is about $20. So, you know, maybe you're talking
pretty hard to make that pencil.
20,000, you know, $25,000 or something. Yeah, total income from it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry if I rambled there.
No, not at all.
Can I
public
put
forum?
this into the record, though?
Please step forward.
Good morning. My name is Marilyn Jasper. Thank you for having this workshop. Transparency and open dialogue hopefully will spare us from what we went through in 2007 2000, leading up to the 2008 winery ordinance. It was not pleasant, and I hope we don't get to that place again. When I first read the staff report, I was extremely disappointed. George, you've clarified a lot of the things in there that make it a little better, but there are just a couple of points that I feel I need to stress, and one is all the stakeholders have to be a part of this. It cannot be one aspect only, and when I first read it, George has clarified it, but that's how that started out. Otherwise, we're going to be right in the same mess. And I'm sure, as was referenced, enforcement is a key. It's not about restrictions. It's about the vagueness and the interpretation of what is there. And somehow it gets convoluted. Then we have this enforcement. Along with enforcement, I'd like to see the workshops consider penalties, not may be revoked, may be, no, it's got to be shall. And you, like three strikes, you're out. It should be one, or the first time you're out. Maybe it's just a timeout. You're out for 5 years the first. But there's too much, not only lack of enforcement, pay the little, there's not even a fine to pay as far as I know. I haven't seen any enforcement action. And the grand jury report really brings this home. It is a problem. And hopefully it can be addressed. It's been mentioned, and I want to emphasize it. I don't know why this update with winery promotions can't be combined with or worked along with the entertainment and the event center upgrades or updates. Seems like they go hand in hand, and as I don't want to reiterate. The last thing I would hope that we could deal with in these workshops are definitions. And it's already been alluded to a little bit, but what is bona fide agriculture? You know, what gives you that little edge? Another word that's that appears, I believe, in the current winery ordinance is something they call the functional equivalent. And if ever there was a word that wants to create alienation between neighbors, it's when something gets passed without a hearing because it's a functional equivalent in terms of ag operations. That's got to either be more restrictively defined or taken out completely. You either follow the rule or you don't get to do the thing. And last, I realize with staff resources are tight. The 3 counties that were looked at, I'm glad they were looked at, but there are some other counties that have been through this and have really been through the ringer. About the same time Placer County, actually it was about a year before, that Placer County was going through its, Monterey County had a huge, their controversy, their contentiousness got much further than Placer County's. But they ended up with some settlements that might give us some ideas. Another terrible, contentious working of this was in San Diego. They went through all kinds of stuff about the same time that we were going through ours. And last, you probably read or heard about it from other testimony earlier this year, San Joaquin County is really dealing with this now. And I've spoken to someone in planning at in San Joaquin County, and they are, it's not been settled, but we might keep an ear out to see how they're going to resolve some real nasty issues. Thank you for doing this, and I hope it comes out good on all. I hope it's win-win for everybody.
Marilyn?
Yes.
A quick question.
Yes.
You made reference to a grand jury report.
Yes.
Was that specific to code enforcement and wineries, or just code enforcement in general?
Actually, the title is Placer County Winery Ordinance Enforcement Review. So they deal, it's primarily with enforcement, the report is, it's online, but it also, it goes a little bit off into other areas. It's worth taking a look at. It's relatively short.
And what was their finding?
Well, they want the county to get back. There is a problem. Their finding is there's a problem. My interpretation of their finding is there is a problem with a lack of enforcement. And maybe you can correct me if you
Okay, we can ask that later. I just wondered,
Yeah.
get a little clarification.
Its primary focus is enforcement, but it also says eliminating vague terminology and conflicting standards. So it's related to enforcement, but it goes off into some other suggestions and wants responses from planning, board of supervisors, and then some copies were sent to some other agencies.
Okay.
So it's big. I think it's a reasonable report. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I won't take time signing in here. I'll do that afterwards. My name is Stuart Perry, and I own Fawn Ridge Winery. I guess for me, I'd like to put this meeting into context. It is a workshop. The wineries didn't call for it in and of themselves. The original ordinance was passed some time ago, and there was agreement at that time that the ordinance would periodically be reviewed. We do want to monitor and take note of the development of the winery industry in Placer County. There's been references to other counties throughout California. I'd ask the commission to reflect on those locations throughout our state and realize that each and every one of those also was a fledgling beginning wine industry at their own particular pace. Napa Valley is not Napa Valley today as it was when it was founded. So we're small little business people trying to eke out a bit of a living in the wine industry. Yes, passion is certainly a part of it. I wouldn't recommend anybody getting involved in agriculture if they didn't have a passion. Every farmer that starts out has to outlay a great investment, infrastructure and the like. Land alone in Placer County now is quite a challenge to a small business farmer that wants to start out. So in looking at the general plan, I read a lot about, and the word shall came up, and I do see shall within the general plan in its support of agriculture at a public level. I hear a lot about agriculture in Placer County. That's in essence what draws people to our community, and agritourism is a nationwide effort at this point. When I was a young kid growing up in upstate New York farm community, there were such things as barn dances and other events that farmers had to try and add to selling eggs and milk and all of that. My uncle had a dairy farm I grew up on. So here we are trying to revisit the ordinance. The workshop was set up, and as you'll see in the schedule in the staff report, there'll be other workshops, there'll be MAC meetings, there'll be every possible way of gaining information and input from stakeholders throughout the process. The original one was very painful, but we're willing to step up and revisit all of these issues. If I want to have a little winemaker dinner inside my winery building without any amplified music outside, right now I'm prohibited from doing that without going through a complete ARP process. So a lot of the smaller operations, we're looking for some kind of a tiered, flexible revisiting of what constitutes an event. We don't do weddings. I get calls every week, people wanting to do weddings. They want to do weddings at a winery and a vineyard by virtue of its appearance and their particular respect for the I guess the country atmosphere that we have. They don't want to go downtown to a commercial venue. They want to be out in the country. They take their pictures with the vineyard in the background. Other issues that have come up, I think, will need to be addressed individually, parking and the like. I mean, I hope the commission realizes that a small business person is not going to overburden the capacity of their ability to do business, because then you're just basically frustrating your customers and you'll lose them. So we're not in the business of overcrowding, trying to pull off an event that's beyond our capacity, and each of us are a little bit different. So those are the parameters that I think we'll have to try and work on in the weeks, if not months to come. So I do hope it isn't a long, drawn-out process. I haven't heard anything that didn't come up the first time around with the original winery ordinance, so I'm just hoping we can kind of fine-tune everything. So there's been a few misconceptions. The original ordinance was not really written by the wineries. It was a consensus building process through the course of some 5 different public hearings. I would argue some of that was a compromise on our behalf. So we're here to kind of revisit. And I do agree that the general agricultural community could benefit from an agritourism approach, because as I meet with my other colleagues in the mandarin industry and the like, maybe they'd like to do a dinner in the orchard or something of that nature. So, and growing up in Sacramento, I used to visit Commissioner Denio's place. It's changed over the years. So let's address change and try to do the best we can at addressing everybody's issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak? Anyone else? Please.
Hi, my name is Kevin Stevenson. I own Cask Wines. I'll just start by saying my winery is actually within the town of Loomis, but we have a tasting room on the Flower Farm property at the intersection of Horseshoe Bar and Auburn Folsom, so this does directly affect us. But we have kind of a unique perspective from both sides. I was actually going to make a lot of the points that Stu just made, so I'll skip over those. He spoke very well about them. I just want to make a couple of things clear. Unlimited is a scary word, and it's a scary word to the wineries too, but it does depend on things like the definition of small versus large events. We all want clarification on that. The wineries especially, we want clarification, so we're cognizant of those issues. If I have a birthday party come in on a day that I'm already open for tasting and it's 20 people, is that an event? We want clarification on that, because right now it's very amorphous. So I think we're all on the same page there. I would ask that we really keep the wine ordinance separate from general ag. We are unique. It's just a special business for lots of reasons. And we need to define that. As Cindy and Stu both mentioned, the cooperative approach of wine tasting room, that's just not feasible. I think as we go through this process, that'll become clearer. But from my standpoint, noise is already regulated. I know it seems like there may be complaints about noise here and there at wine tasting rooms. I'd rather see that enforced on its own. That's an issue. And the reality is many wineries are not always happy with what some of their winery neighbors are doing to that end. So most of us are cognizant of that as an issue, and I hope that is addressed. And just to reiterate what Stu just said, the original ordinance was really just to get the ball rolling. To say that it was the vintners that put it forth, it really was a collaborative process. We all knew it would change, and we all knew that 2 or 3 years down the line we'd be having this conversation. And we've all learned a lot in 2 or 3 years, some of the good, some of the bad, but I think mostly very positive, and I hope we keep that in mind. I guess the key point I would make is excessive regulation is going to kill the wine business in Placer County. I work 80 hours a week now. I work full-time making wine, selling wine, marketing wine, running my tasting room. It is about the bottom line with me. This is what I do. I'm fortunate that I can do that. Some people are, working 40 hours a week at their day job and 40 hours a week doing the wine thing. But it is about the bottom line. I have to make money doing this. I've been doing it since '06. Started with 200 cases. I'm now up to 2,000. If you're making 2,000 cases of wine for fun, first of all, you're insane. If you make 200 cases of wine for fun, you're insane. That's more wine than you can possibly drink in a year. It is about the bottom line, and I just hope we keep that in mind. And it is about passion, too. So anyway, those are my points.
Thank you.
Seeing nobody else coming forward, we'll go ahead and close this meeting. Not hearing from staff. Richard, one last comment?
Oh, maybe you're going to have, well.
We're going to have a motion to close.
No, go ahead and close the public. I wanted to talk to staff a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Staff will talk with Mr. Councilman. We're done, folks. Thank you all for coming.
Oh, no, we're not done.
Who we got?
I was going to have some more discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said go ahead and close it.
Oh, no, you're closing the.
Oh, close to the public. I'm
This-
sorry.
Mr.
You don't have to
Chairman,
leave yet, folks.
Just to kind of back up,
go ahead, Paul.
this staff would request that the commission provide us some direction on where to head, what your thoughts are about an update to the ordinance.
Okay, Richard, now you're on.
Okay. Yeah, I want to visit back with what some people have addressed as the acreage that's required to produce wine and have a tasting room. And, I kind of go back a few years when we talked about this and worked on the ordinance. And at that time, I had visited El Dorado County, and they were considering their ordinance. And they had an acreage limit, which was much higher than what Placer County came up with. Of course, their vineyards are much larger, and so they can have a larger acreage. And at that time, I guess the rationale for it, and really I'm kind of bringing this up because I noticed that our Ag Commissioner, Mr. Huffsinger, is proposing an increase in the acreage in his letter. And the purpose at that time that I was hearing was what El Dorado was concerned about is somebody with too much money would come in to their farm zone and build a winery and then not really be involved in agriculture. And so that was the purpose, at least, that I was hearing in El Dorado County. And at the time, I know I was thinking, well, we have small acreages here. It's only, 4.5 acres or something like that is the minimum, which really doesn't give you the ability to have 5 acres of vineyards. But at the time, I was thinking 3, but at any rate, the conclusion of it was 1 acre, and I'm hearing today, and I know at that time there was concern that maybe somebody that is in the business now that doesn't have more than 1 acre, what would we be doing to that person? And I'm hearing about a winery today that really doesn't have any acres. They're depending upon contracts with local grape people to provide the grapes for their winery. And so at any rate, I'm just bringing this up because it seems to me there's a dilemma there that, it's going to be hard for the commission really to come up with an answer to that without maybe some more solid thought on the part of the Ag Commission or the Vintners Association to give us some clarification on how that should be. I think the idea of having agriculture on the property, if you're going to have a winery and wine tasting, makes sense. But, like we heard today, there may be an exception to that. So I don't have an answer, but I am asking the ag community to probably more thoroughly discuss this and give us some feedback on that particular issue.
Just one comment on that, because I know when the one gentleman came up and talked about, not growing grapes and stuff, I just see 2 different entities. I see grower processors and just processors. And my understanding was it was in industrial. Was it industrial zoning? Resort.
My property is resort.
Resort.
Right. Which is commercial zoning. And like I
Okay.
mentioned, I'm adjacent to industrial zoning, including an asphalt plant. Right.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying it's completely different than, say, residential or whatever. So I just see that as completely separate from what we're going through. Because you're a processor, you're not a grower.
I'm being asked to plant an acre of grapes by Josh.
Yeah, but I still see it as separate at this time, and I think that does have to be addressed in this too.
Any other questions, staff? Or staff? Direction for staff.
No, I just,
Well, we're going to have.
staff was asking direction. Well, I think the staff has heard pretty much our comments earlier on, not that we can't make comments now, and you've heard from the public, but I think one of the things I heard was that get everybody involved, not just the wineries. And again, somebody who spoke for the wineries said it wasn't their idea. So they're trying to get out of this that it was only a winery-driven review, but to get the other, and I guess to that end, your schedule does show that you're going to have a bunch of public hearings, so this is not a decision-making day-to-day anyway. I think you've heard from, at least from me and from the public, and hopefully you were taking notes, so I don't have any additional comments to make at this time.
I'll make a comment. I would like to stress the idea that indeed any ordinance that we're considering should be comprehensive for agricultural primarily, and perhaps some parts specialized in for wines or some other particular form of agriculture. But I think that plus the idea of the community center is a lot on the plate, and probably not the best thing to separate completely, but to try to hold that some of those can be worked together, especially agricultural and wineries. Okay. Is that enough for you, Paul?
Anything else? You want us to write the ordinance for you?
Yeah, don't ask. I'm not qualified. Don't ask. No. Okay, well, hearing no other direction from the board, then I will officially close the meeting now.